the Council's second iteration of our Reimagining Public Safety Town Halls. We are excited to be back with you this evening for another robust conversation, hearing from both local and national experts in the field of violence prevention. This evening's conversation, this town hall is going to be chaired by our Chair of Public Safety, Councilmember Mitch Brown. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Council President. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Again, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Council Town Hall on Reimagining Public Safety. As part of Council's Reimagining Safety Initiative, Council is holding 6 town halls to hear from national experts and residents. This in addition to focus groups and a community survey. This will help inform Council as we head towards passing an operating budget in February. I'd like to thank Council President Harden and my Council colleagues who are joining us this evening for tonight's town hall. We'll hear a short presentation from our guests. Council members will ask questions of tonight's presenters, and then the Saunders Company will lead the audience through an engagement activity to help get your feedback on this process. Finally, we'll hear public testimony. Before we begin tonight's presentation, I'd like to invite Gail Saunders of the Saunders Company to provide some instructions about the public engagement section of tonight's event. Ms. Saunders?
Thank you so much, Councilmember Brown, and good evening, everyone. As Councilmember Brown indicated, later in this session, we're going to engage you in an interactive exercise, and that will require you to use your cell phone, to use your laptop, iPad, or any other device that you like, and go to www.menti.com. And we'll remind you of that again as we go through the interactive exercise. But we wanted you to be ready with your cell phone, your laptop, your iPad, or another browser, open another browser on your computer so that you'll be able to engage and give your opinions and your ideas in a series of questions that we're going to ask you. We're really excited about it, and we'll look forward to that interactive activity after our presenters. Thank you, Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Ms. Saunders. We appreciate it. As we begin tonight's panel discussion, I believe it's important to recognize that this past year we've seen a historic level of violence in our city and across the country and other cities as well. Our community has seen the highest number of shootings and homicides in its history, a troubling number of them involving young people and especially, unfortunately, people of color. It is vital that we begin to think differently about how we reduce violence in this community to stop the cycle that has led to so much senseless loss of life. That is why this year, the Department of Public Safety entered into a contract with criminologist Dr. David Kennedy and the National Network for Safe Communities to analyze the patterns of violence and provide strategies on how to reduce it. Dr. Kennedy is one among the nation's most respected consultants in the field of modern policing and has been so for over 20 years. He led the Boston Gun Project, whose Operation Ceasefire intervention was responsible for 63% reduction in youth homicide victimization and has since been effectively implemented in numerous cities as the group violence intervention. His work in Boston won awards and certainly also awards with the International Association of the Chiefs of Police. He's also co-founded the National Network for Safe Communities, an alliance of more than 50 jurisdictions committed to strategies that combine the best of law enforcement and community-driven approaches to improve public safety, minimize arrests and incarceration, enhance police legitimacy, and rebuild relationships between law enforcement and distressed communities. Tonight, I'm joined by Deputy Director George Speaks from the Department of Public Safety and Dr. Kennedy for them to discuss this community safety initiative. With that being said, Director Speaks, the floor is yours, sir.
And the National Network for Safe Communities. As you said, Dr. Kennedy is among the nation's most respected researchers in the field of modern policing and has been so for over 20 years. The contract that we have will complement and build upon other initiatives within our comprehensive neighbor safety strategy, and especially our Safe Neighborhoods Initiative. In fact, the Safe Neighborhoods Initiative is modeled after Professor Kennedy's work. Please recall that the genesis of this initiative from several years ago was the BREAD organization. And at the same time I was initially meeting with BREAD, now retired Judge Pat Sharon, or Duffy, loaned me Professor Kennedy's book entitled Don't Shoot, which was about what we now know as the Boston Miracle and Operation Ceasefire. We have instituted a version of Professor Kennedy's work into practice here in Columbus with our Safe Neighborhoods Initiative. Now, this initiative focuses on violent felony offenders who are on probation and are at risk to reoffend and commit other violent acts, especially with guns. The participants are ordered to a session of the Court of Common Pleas, where they hear from a variety of different perspectives, from family members of those who've been killed by gun violence, from the clergy, from medical professionals, from police, from criminal defense attorneys, and from city and county and federal prosecutors. And I would like to thank and publicly recognize the outstanding work of these volunteers who have contributed so much time and effort to this initiative. Those volunteers include, but are not limited to, the Honorable Administrative Judge Steve McIntosh of our Franklin County Court of Common Pleas, Doug Patrick of the Social Service Agency Alvis 180 Degree Impact, Marion Stuckey of the Columbus Board of Health, Dave DeVillers, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Ohio, Pastor Fred Lamar of the Family Missionary Baptist Church, Minister Donnell Muhammad of the Nation of Islam, Mosque number 43, Joey Gibson, who's the Deputy Chief Prosecutor of the City of Columbus and a former Franklin County prosecutor, Fred Bitton Jr., a criminal defense attorney, Lori Franciscan, who's the Chief Probation Officer of the Court of Common Pleas, Dr. David Kessick, who was our physician in our Columbus Division of Fire and is now with the Columbus Board of Health, Joey Green of the Columbus Urban League, Johanna Sawyers of the Franklin County Department of Jobs and Family Service, Liz Jordan of Southeast Mental Health, Mary Counter of the BREAD organization, Alicia Saunders, a strong community safety advocate, Sean Stevenson, another great advocate, and Aletha Wall. And lastly, Commander Bobby Strasball of Columbus PD. Now, as I said before, these participants are called in and they are offered significant social services and workforce development resources through some of those groups I just mentioned. Alvis 180, Columbus Urban League, the Franklin County Probation Department, Jobs and Family Services, many resources. These resources are offered to provide an alternative path from a life of crime and violence. However, they are also made a promise that should they be involved in another gun crime, then they will be prosecuted to the maximum extent under the law, particularly federal law, where gun specifications are far more draconian than under state law. Now, we've had very good results with approximately 28 individual participants in this initiative. And I say good results in terms of successfully completing probation, enrolling in social services and job readiness programs, and most importantly, not engaging or reoffending in violent crime. We've had some great results. But by enlisting the assistance of David and the national network, we hope to expand upon this positive impact from the individual participants to their broader circle of associates. And most importantly, those associates who are most apt to commit violent crime and their leaders who are directing the violent crime. Now, we are currently in the first phase of our work. In fact, last week, we had a 2-day summit with Professor Kennedy's folks in law enforcement, which included our homicide detectives, our criminal intelligence analysts, and federal as well as county prosecutors. Much more work is to be done in the coming weeks. I'd like to segue now to Professor Kennedy, who can provide a broad national perspective of violence in major U.S. cities and an overview of group violence intervention and focused deterrence. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Director Speaks. Am I audible?
Yes.
Very good. So, Director, Council, it always feels a little bit off to say it's a pleasure to be with all of you, because we are with all of you because you are having very, very serious violence problems, which, as the director has just said, is something that we're seeing all over the country. This is a very difficult time for these issues nationally. What we're not necessarily seeing is cities making this a priority. And so we're impressed that Columbus is doing that. That's not happening everywhere. And we're honored and hopeful about being involved with the city. We have a saying at the National Network, which is we like to work with people who like to work. And we're at this early stage in our setup with Columbus, but as you're going to hear, there is reason for optimism here, and we're very pleased to be able to work with you. So I have a short presentation before we go to back and forth. Could we bring that up? And if we could advance. So this is the bad news. Cities all over the country are in really, really serious trouble with respect to homicide and gun violence. It's sudden and it's very acute. So part of the national success story, and in not just in violence, but really in broad social policy, has been the long crime decline in the United States. And it's not nearly good enough. And you'll hear from me in a bit about how particularly it's not good enough for many communities of color. But it's real. The peak in violence in the United States in the crack era of the late early and 1990s, in most places has been 2 or 3 times what they have been seeing in recent years. And that decline from the peak 20 years ago has, for the most part, been quite steady across the country. I am presently in my home in New York City, which really has become the international poster child for this decline. In New York City in the early 1990s, there were over 2,200 people killed every year. It's unfathomable now. And year before last in New York City, that number was under 300. Just extraordinary progress. New York City has had a very bad year. It's seeing levels it hasn't seen for 10 or 15 years. NYPD has taken more guns off the street in New York this past calendar year in 2020 than since it started keeping track in 1994. So this is not just Columbus. This is happening in many, many, many places. There's a particular intersection of factors that I'll be talking about that we think is driving this. But alongside the impact of the COVID pandemic, and alongside, of course, the economic devastation that has wrought, this is a national problem. And as I've alluded to, and as I'll come back to, it is not evenly distributed socially. So if we can advance. there is real progress that's been made in understanding homicide and gun violence over the last decades. And much of that has been built on understanding about some core empirical facts on the ground that turn out to be invariably true, no matter where one is. It's true in New York, it's true in Chicago, it's true in Columbus, it's true in LA. We're finding that it's true in Mexico City and it's true in El Salvador, which is the worst violence is always concentrated in very small, identifiable, and very special populations. So we talk about the crime rate, the homicide rate for Columbus. That's true. There is a population in Columbus, and the victimization numbers are what they are in Columbus. But that victimization and that perpetration will be concentrated in particular neighborhoods in Columbus, not across the entire city. And what most importantly we've come to understand in the last decades is those neighborhoods are not dangerous. We actually have an article out of the National Network called "There is no such thing as a dangerous neighborhood." This is not the way I was raised and trained. It's not the way we have been brought up to think about this. But neighborhoods that outsiders have thought of as dangerous neighborhoods are not dangerous. They will have within them very small, very intense networks of people who are astronomically high risk for both being hurt and, to a lesser extent, hurting other folks. The victimization and the perpetration go together. Overwhelmingly, people in these high-risk networks affect each other. And this is a statistical truth. It's not without exception. People get hurt in other ways, particularly by accident. But overwhelmingly, the people in this sort of special world are at extremely high risk for hurting, for being hurt, and then, of course, as a consequence, for being arrested, for going to jail, for going to prison, for being on probation and parole. And the concentration is nearly unimaginable. The homicide risk for somebody walking around in the United States right now is about 5 per 100,000. So five victimizations per 100,000 in the population statistically. If you're in this small high risk world, your victimization risk every year of being killed, mostly by gunshot, can be well over 500 per 100,000. And then there can be 3, 4, 5 non-fatal victimizations for everybody who's killed. And suddenly you're up to a few percent of everybody in this world will be shot and killed every single year. It is unconscionable. And we can talk about this in terms of numbers. This is overwhelmingly concentrated in communities of color. This is, in my mind, a failure of our democracy. There is, in my mind, no greater racial inequity than the inequity that comes with being predictably shot and killed at rates hundreds of times the rest of the United States, year in and year out. And the mission of the National Network is to do something about this. The spikes that we're seeing nationally are not moving out of this special, very high risk world. So it could be otherwise. It could be moving much more broadly within the affected communities. It could be going to other communities, to other neighborhoods. We're not seeing that. And this does not in any way make any of this okay, but it does mean that it could be even worse. and folks who are not at high risk before are really not at high risk now. What we are seeing is an enormous increase in risk and victimization amongst those who are in trouble already. And if we can advance. So I said we've made some headway on the facts on the ground. That issue of concentration is the first one. The second one is this, and that is that overwhelmingly that violence and that concentration occurs within identifiable groups in the community. So my profession, my world has very deliberately stepped away from thinking about gangs and worrying about gangs and what is the definition of a gang and does Columbus have real gangs and all that kind of thing. It turns out not to be in any way helpful and a real distraction. What is true is that the violence is associated with groups. And those can be, we work in Chicago, that can be what Chicago and everybody else would recognize as a real gang. It can be a kind of no-name association of 7, 13, 15, mostly young men in a community. They have no name, they have no leadership, they've got no connection to national gang structures, but they are a group. They know who their friends are, they know who their enemies are. And the violence is overwhelmingly concentrated within the groups, between the groups, and driven by group dynamics, which I'll talk about in a minute. And there's almost an arithmetic standard at this point. This is part of what the director was mentioning, that we've begun working with Columbus just over the last week or so. It's not difficult to identify these groups. They're not hidden. They're not working undercover. If you look at a large number of homicides and shootings, what will turn out to be true, and again, this is not Columbus, it's everywhere. Those groups, everybody in them will represent right around 0.5% of the population. Sometimes it's even smaller than that. They will always be connected with at least half and often 60, 70, 80% of all homicides and non-fatal shootings, which simply means, as a practical matter, that if we can affect the behavior of these groups, we can keep people from getting killed and hurt. We can keep people from getting arrested. We can keep people from going to prison. And what the director talked about and council talked about is the original work called Operation Ceasefire in Boston was the first work that recognized this and figured out an effective way of engaging with these groups. And what was then called ceasefire, because of this group focus, we now call the group violence intervention. And that's because this kind of violence is all about the groups. So if we may advance. So the group dynamics are everything. And they're not what we usually think they are. So I was raised to believe, I was taught this is about making money. The groups are selling drugs, or they're doing identity theft, or they're doing the underground economy things that they do to make money. That's an illicit enterprise. You can't go to the police or the Better Business Bureau when you get ripped off or something like that. You've got to protect your corner. Therefore, the violence is an essential part of that illicit economy. And that makes perfect sense, and it's just not true. What is true is that the folks in these groups and the group themselves are overwhelmingly locked into a group dynamic and a kind of a street code that drives the violence. So in any place, much of the violence will be driven by vendetta, what the streets call beef. There will be one group, they will be beefing with another group. They will have been shooting back and forth, sometimes for decades. If you go to anybody involved today, they will they will not even know what started it or what it's about. But they know who their friends are, and they know who their enemies are. They are genuinely at risk from their enemies. Their friends put pressure on them to have their back. And this kind of cyclical violence will go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, literally endlessly. There is a money dynamic. It's just not very important. So we will look exhaustively at hundreds of incidents in any particular city. Less than a fifth will have anything to do with making money or anything to do with anything associated with making money, like, retaliation for a bad drug debt or something like that. Some of the dumbest stuff that happens on the street, like armed robberies on the public way, carjackings and such, they will overwhelmingly turn out to be committed by the youngest members associated with these groups. So they won't look like they've been ordered by gang leadership or anything like that, and they haven't been. But the very small number of people who do these things overwhelmingly are part of these groups and networks. And most of the groups are quiet at any given time. Most of the people in the groups will never do anything particularly severe. And what we call impact players, the group members who are the most active and the most influential, they're a handful of the actual group members. And so because the violence is concentrated in the groups, there actually aren't that many people in the groups, and there are even fewer people who are really active. Something like a violence issue that has brought council and the public together in Columbus because the city correctly feels like it's in something like a crisis will come down to a very small number of people. And the good news there is simply that if we can engage with that small number of people effectively, that can have citywide impact because they really are the problem. And if we can advance. I said earlier that there are some factors that have suddenly combined to make all of this a lot worse. So one of them is the pandemic. And I will say that none of us who work on this saw this coming. I had hopes that the pandemic and social distancing would maybe keep these groups apart and people congregate in clubs and things like that, and there's opportunity for these beefs to spark off. I was hopeful that the pandemic might quiet some of this down. That's not what's happened, and it's not something that certainly any of us did predict. But what seems to be the case is that because of the restriction in mobility that the pandemic has brought. So these are mostly young men involved in all of this. They're not in school because people aren't in school. They're not in clubs because the clubs are closed. They're staying close to home. They're not, for the most part, observing all the public health guidelines. They are hanging out with their friends. They're easy to find. And literally what we're seeing is the small number of the most dangerous members of these groups and networks are literally finding that it is easy to find and to go after the people that they're after. And because that's true, the people who are at risk of victimization know that. They're hypervigilant, their friends are paying attention. And it's created a violence dynamic that has fed on itself within these small groups and networks. So that's part of what's going on if we can advance again. The other thing, of course, that has happened is that the national outrage around police violence has swept the nation. And I'm going to be very blunt about this. I work very closely with police. I am also deeply critical of the police, and the police officers that I work with know this very well. I believe that as important as good policing is, there's a tremendous amount of bad policing out there, and there's no worse or more obvious expression of that than unwarranted police killings and police violence. The country literally voted with its feet on this, and the consequence of that in the most immediate sense is that police all over the country took a tremendous legitimacy hit. Whatever the language is, whether that's about defunding or abolition or what have you, in scholarly terms, that means that the legitimacy of the police as an institution has gone down dramatically. So in the social sciences, legitimacy is the recognition on the part of the public that the police have standing, that they are authentic, that they can say, don't do this, and that has meaning. And when lots of people say, we don't believe in the police anymore, we don't want them in our communities, that is a tremendous reduction in legitimacy. And it has real consequences. We have a lot of science on this. Again, this violence is concentrated in historically harmed, mostly Black African-American communities. They had good reason already not to trust the police. This has made it even worse. And that small number of most active, highest risk people know that their community has withdrawn from the police. They know that they are even more likely to get away with what they want to do. They know that the police are less effective. It means that they are freer to act. It means that they are doing what they wish within their high-risk networks. It means, again, that the people that they put at risk know that they are carrying their guns, they are themselves doing what they need to do to protect themselves. And that is clearly also contributing to the violence. So let me be very clear about this. There's a way of thinking about public safety that says, unless the police are free to do what they want, then there will be violence. The reality is exactly the other way around. If the affected communities do not trust the police, they will not trust the police. Small numbers of people will do what they need to protect themselves. The road to public safety leads through good policing, police reform, police legitimacy, a kind of policing that the communities will embrace. And part of what you're going to be hearing from me is that the work that we can help Columbus do is a pathway to that different kind of public safety. If we can advance. So there's long-term work to do around public safety. And I and my office embrace the push for a new kind of public safety, for investments in communities, for attention to root causes, to address fundamental matters of racism and inequity. The fact is, as critically important as those things are, they are not immediate responses to the kind of violence that Columbus is seeing. Those are at best medium and long-term answers. They will not work this week. They will not work this year. So we need to do something to keep people alive and unhurt now. It's also the case that violence is a root cause of the violence. When people know that they are at risk, particularly people in these high-risk networks, and they know that the police and others are not going to keep them safe, they will do what they need to do to keep themselves and their loved ones and their families safe. Anybody will. And given the astronomical victimization and risk that these folks face, They are going to carry guns. They are going to group up so that they have people to watch their back. One of the most important things we can do to reduce the violence is to reduce the violence. And that means we need to take immediate action to make this better. And again, that's what the national network can help the city with. If we can advance. So part of what we will be saying to the city is that this core issue of police legitimacy is part of the answer to violence reduction and to public safety. Good police leadership understands this. They know that while they have a critically important role to play with respect to violence, they should not be the first response to homelessness and addiction. I have a friend who says we shouldn't think of police as first responders. They're simply the only ones left standing because of the way we've taken money away from very important public services and public goods. I don't know the particular history of policing in Columbus, certainly not as well as I will as we work forward with you. But I know American policing. I know the way that police have been part of the machine that has fed mass incarceration. I've spent my life focusing on fighting ideas like zero tolerance and that we should protect communities by arresting everybody we can. I've said that the communities where the violence is concentrated have not created themselves. They have been created by a history in which law has been used in the service of white supremacy and racial harm done under color of law. We need to face that. We need to be honest about it. And we need to commit to repair. And we will be working with the city on all of those things, including the group violence intervention itself, which is a way to do this better and to do less harm. So if we may advance. So Columbus and every city needs immediate ways of addressing the violence. And the good news is those ways are now available. That was not true when I began during the introductions correctly said. I've been at this for decades. Until not that long ago, there was nothing that in the language of today we would call evidence-based approaches to addressing this violence. Things that we know work, that have a solid research base, that have solid evaluations. That's not true anymore. There are things we know work. And what they all have in common is that they focus on the violence as violence, not about other kinds of even serious crime. Violence is different. It is especially harmful. It is especially corrosive to communities. We make it a special focus. The groups drive the violence, so the focus is on the groups. It is about direct engagement, direct communication with those groups, which I'll talk about. It has these three core elements of community moral engagement with the groups, of doing everything we can to support group members and keep them safe, and under particular circumstances to make sure that groups knows that when they kill and shoot people, there will be consequences. What we call the group violence intervention is not a program. Everybody that does it in their own way. It's a framework, it's a strategy, and what the National Network does is work with you to support you in figuring out how to do this yourself. What you do will not look exactly what Toledo and Cincinnati did, but they made this work, and Columbus can make this work as well. So if we can advance. So it has these three core elements. There is a strategic place for law enforcement. And what we want to do is say to the high, we know who you are, We don't want you hurt. We don't want you to hurt anybody else. We recognize that this is a group dynamic, and the fact that it's a group dynamic changes things. So if you have two groups in the community and they've been beefing for years, which is extremely common, law enforcement can focus on the last shooter from either side, and they can do a wonderful and professional job. They can clear that case. Those two shooters can go to lockup. And on the ground, each of the groups is still there. The vendetta is still there. There will be another shooting because the groups are still in vendetta. And locking those two people up has not changed the group dynamic at all. The community engagement folks can teach those same two people anger management, or they can get them placed in jobs, or they can even get them out of the neighborhood and out of the line of fire. And again, the groups are there, the vendetta is there, they go home from work, the other side is still trying to kill them, their friends are still putting pressure on them to back them up. Focusing on individuals doesn't change the group dynamic. And this has helped us understand why so much of the incredibly hard work everybody's done forever to address the violence has just not worked the way we want it to. Because overwhelmingly we have focused on individuals, naturally enough. That doesn't reach what's really going on. And so what we want to do on the law enforcement side is tell the groups ahead of time that under certain circumstances, when there is violence, the group as such will get attention. And when everybody in the group understands that, then they police each other. When somebody goes off because they've got a beef with their ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend and they're going to do a drive-by, they say, don't do that. And we can turn the group dynamic toward violence prevention rather than toward violence. The group touches do not have to be extreme. So in the introduction, there was a mention of federal prosecution, and it's absolutely right. Federal prosecution is typically extremely serious. We don't have to do that kind of thing when we're focusing on groups. And if there are half a dozen people in the group and they're on probation, and they know ahead of time, literally, that something as apparently minor as if somebody in their group shoots somebody, their probation contacts will be doubled for the next 6 months. And they will have to come into the office, they will have to mask up, they will have to see their probation supervisor. They don't like that. And we found that literally something as apparently insignificant as that is enough to turn the group dynamic around. And we get that right. People do not get arrested. They don't get locked up. They don't go to federal prison for 15 years and as armed career criminal. And this is both more effective and much more judicious. And with a city full of groups, if we're talking to them all at once, we can say to them, the next group that shoots somebody is going to get this kind of attention. The most violent group is going to get this kind of attention. When they get that after every such conversation, nobody wants to be the first group that shoots somebody. Nobody wants to be the most violent group. We've created a race to the bottom, and we've gotten a tremendous reduction in violence and a tremendous reduction in actual law enforcement, which is what we want. So if we can advance. Second core element here is what we call the moral voice of the community. And when I do this in person, and there will come a time when we can all be together again, I will say to people, raise your hand if when you grew up you were afraid of the police. And in a room full of law enforcement and community activists and elected officials and such, a few people will raise their hand. If I say to them, raise your hand if when you grew up you were afraid of your mother, everybody raises their hand. And that is the the real mechanism for community safety. Healthy communities, safe communities aren't safe because everybody's afraid of the feds. They're safe because they have the natural community processes that say there's right and there's wrong, and that's how we live here. What we think of on the outside as dangerous communities are fundamentally those healthy communities. They govern themselves despite all the harm that has been done to them, so that they raise their kids and they engage with each other, so that, just to say it again, almost nobody in the community is at high risk for violence. And those that are have tremendous respect for a lot of people in the community. They may not respect, forgive me, the mayor. They may not respect the chief of police. They may not respect the officer on the corner, but they respect many, many, many figures of natural standing in the community. And they particularly respect the mothers who have lost their sons to gun violence. They respect the original gangsters who grew up and learned how hollow this life is. They respect many faith leaders. Every block has somebody on it who can walk up to these guys, and they're not afraid and they are respected. So part of what GVI does is bring those figures together with those at high risk so they can articulate community norms and expectations. It's tremendously powerful. It's not law enforcement. And again, when that works, nobody gets arrested, nobody goes to jail, and that's what we all want. And if we can advance. Third element here is what we call support and outreach. No matter what anybody has done, we want them safe. We don't want them hurt. We don't want them to hurt anybody else. And we want, just to keep on saying it, as few people to be arrested and to go into the system as is humanly possible. So we work incredibly hard to do that. The catchphrase that a lot of us have come to use for our mission here is safe, alive, and free. And we want as much of that possible to be done by meeting people where they are and keeping them safe, alive, and free. We've learned the hard way that that is not about what we used to think it was about. So the menu here used to be get people back into school, get them into job placement, and the metric was GED and jobs. And that absolutely does not work. My engagement in Ohio began with the Cincinnati Initiative to Reduce Violence in 15 years ago in Cincinnati. There's formal research done by Robin Engel and her team out of the Policing Institute at the University of Cincinnati looking at the Cincinnati Project, which said, as a matter of formal social science evaluation, the connection of those at highest risk with those services made no difference in the violence. And that's our national experience. The job and school menu is just not relevant for these highest risk folks. And we should have seen it a lot earlier. It's obvious when you think about it. When you're 19 years old, somebody's trying to kill you, you are saturated in trauma, you have no place to live, you've got outstanding warrants, you've got substance abuse problems. You can't get your car registered because of your outstanding tickets. You don't have a driver's license, and your little brother is hungry, and that's why you're going to go back out to the corner and make some money. Saying to that person, we'll do an intake assessment, we'll do a needs assessment, we'll put you in a GED, and we'll get you a job referral. You know, frankly, it's insulting. And we've learned this the hard way. What we now think of as support and outreach, we want it to get people to the place where they can be job ready. But first we have to keep people safe. We have to deal with whatever is their immediate risk to their safety. If they're hungry, we need to feed them. If they don't have a roof, we need to get them into housing. If they can't walk down the street because they've got outstanding warrants, we've got to deal with their criminal justice situation. If they say, you know, I will work with you, I need baby formula, we need to get them baby formula. So this is what we call the big, small stuff. It's small to those of us who have stable lives. It's not small to the people who are at highest risk. And so part of what we'll do with Columbus is work with you to help construct a framework that works for those at highest risk. No city begins with this. This is a work in progress for everybody who's doing this. The good news here is that this is work that we can do. And it's easier, in fact, than to try to aspire to get everybody a job. We don't know how to do that. We do know how to keep people safe, alive, and free, or at least to do a much better job of that than we do now. So if we can advance. So I said this is about direct engagement with the groups. It's about these three core elements of putting people on advance notice about, under certain circumstances, attention to groups, to community moral engagement, and to the right kind of outreach and support. This is real work, and it's not perfect, but you do it right, you get big results. This is very powerful stuff. The Boston Project was mentioned. When we did this the first time in Boston, nobody dreamt that in a couple of years there would be 63%, as it was mentioned, reduction in youth homicide and a 50% reduction in killing across the city of Boston. And that over the 5 years that Boston was serious about this, homicide would come down 70% in Boston. But you can actually do this. And it's interesting these days because everybody is thinking about the pandemic. Community violence turns out to be a lot like the pandemic. Effective violence intervention is kind of contact tracing for violence. And GVI is a way of actually doing that and actually stepping up to the realities of the way violence moves around these networks in the communities. If we can advance. The formal social science on this is now to the point that the scholarship is doing what's called systematic reviews. So these are evaluations of the bodies of evaluations that the formal social science has produced over the 25 years this is going on. And it's not perfect. It is a work in progress. Everybody who does this innovates and adds to the portfolio. We will learn from Columbus as you learn from us as we go through this. But it's the best we know how to do, and it can make a really big difference. And to go back to this core issue of legitimacy and the harm that traditional approaches have done, it is a way not just of getting our numbers down, but of reshaping the way we do policing and law enforcement, of respecting that outsiders have fundamentally misunderstood and mistreated these communities, and that we can only do this right with enhanced respect for the affected communities, for an understanding of the victimization and trauma that drives the violence, and by building relationships that are based on those realities that we, for the most part, don't have right now. And GVI and the work that we're going to be doing together is a bridge that will get us partway to those goals. So let me stop there and give it back to Columbus.
Dr. Kennedy, thank you for that presentation. I have a couple questions, but I have my council colleagues to have an opportunity to offer some concerns that they may have. Would you speak to the issue specifically, in your mind's eye, the role police play in reducing gun violence, if at all?
So let me get kind of nerdy for a minute here and talk about the police research on this. So there are very clear findings in the research that certain kinds of policing do reduce violence. So again, that wasn't true some time ago when I started this work. Both police practitioners and the formal research were in agreement that the police can't reduce crime. They just respond to it. That's not true anymore. And for example, there's very clear research that's what's called hotspots policing will reduce gun violence if it's done right. Very often, that kind of policing also does a tremendous amount of harm. And part of what's been extremely problematic about the way researchers and police and often elected and appointed officials have looked at this is they've simply looked at the violence. And if the police do a thing and the violence goes down, then that's been considered a success. So I'm in New York City, which spent 10 years teaching the world that the way to reduce violence was to saturate Black and brown neighborhoods with police officers, touch as many people as possible, stop as many people as possible, cite and arrest and ticket as many people as possible, and pursue zero tolerance. And there's evidence that certain sorts of policing along those lines will in fact reduce violence. And while that happens, people go to jail, people get criminal records, young Black men and brown men especially get criminal records for doing things that white kids get away with all the time, and they don't worry for a moment about getting stopped by police, and finding some weed in their pocket and getting a drug conviction that will ruin the rest of their lives. Communities are alienated. And we actually know from research in New York City that the more times a young Black man was stopped by NYPD, the more likely he became to commit a criminal act going forward, because his alienation from the police and the law was strengthened by every such contact. So it's not just a question of whether the police can reduce violence. It's overwhelmingly a question of how and what the other consequences are. So the National Network, GVI, the whole community that I'm part of, recognizes, so our catchphrase on this is, communities need policing, they just don't need the kind of policing they've been getting. And there's a way of police and other aspects of criminal justice being effective while dramatically taking less action, doing less harm, being more transparent, building relationship, building trust, building legitimacy. And as those things are enhanced, less and less and less actual enforcement becomes possible. What we aspire to is the same standard that medical and civil practitioners are bound by. In psychiatry and public health and things like that, professionals are expected to take action if and only if somebody is a danger to themselves and to others. And we think that in the criminal law, that should be the same standard. Unless somebody is a danger to themselves or others, we should do absolutely everything we can not to use criminal justice measures. And because at any given time, thankfully, there's a very small number of people who are actually really dangerous. That's something that we can get pretty close to.
Yeah, Dr. Kennedy, I have my council colleagues are here, and I would like to give them an opportunity to ask some questions of you, and certainly of Director Speaks. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So with that, I have Councilmember Tyson. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Brown. I just want to say first of all, thank you for hosting this hearing. And I want to just thank Mr. Kennedy for his presentation today. I certainly appreciate everything you've said, but certainly when you say stay alive and free. And I think that just has to be the theme as we move forward. I'm impressed by your results. And also the last comment I'll make is I am appreciative of the slide that you shared around support and the outreach framework, that certainly sharing that individuals are can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm still don't know. I'm sorry. That the slide that, keeping people alive and out of prison, you're right, because all that does is just continue. Once they get out of prison, they cannot move forward. Looking at the affirmative approach, again, protection from risk, as we're seeing right now, it's during the same neighborhoods and people are just, shooting at each other, as the comments that you've made, people mad about something or whatever the issue was. But again, understanding how to keep people safe, and then the trauma that people are dealing with based upon they've been in a system of violence, the big stuff, the big small stuff, absolutely. If I'm trying to take care of my brother who's home, I need food, I'm going to figure out how do I go and get that food for my brother. And it may mean I'm putting myself at risk to do it. And then, and to link with traditional services. So I truly appreciate your presentation and that the work that you've done and the results that you've had. So I look forward to the opportunity for our city to be able to work with you, to be able to enhance, especially the lives of Black and Brown people in our community. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. When people in my world, I'll certainly say this for myself, spend a lot of time feeling pretty stupid. And what you've just said shouldn't be innovative and it shouldn't be a breakthrough, right? We should have seen this all along, but at least once we do see it, it makes all kinds of very common sense. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Council President Harden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Kennedy, and along with my colleagues. We really are appreciative to have you tonight, but certainly to have you in our city. I too want to respect our time. I know there's going to be a really interactive community engagement session. So my question might be for, so let me ask this, around the non-law enforcement street level intervention work, is there guidance in terms of what kind of a model we should take? Some of that work in some cities is done internally. Some of it is contracted out through neighborhood level intervention work. In Columbus, we have, I'm sure, approaching $2 million worth of annual investment in intervention type works, either through community agencies or the health department. What is your take there? And then my second question will go to Director Speaks, because I too appreciate the philosophy that is coming from Dr. Kennedy. And I'm just interested, how do we get buy-in from the top of public safety all the way down to our line street level officers for this type of safety approach? So that question is for Safety Director. The first question is for Dr. Kennedy.
So I'll take a moment here. So I get doctor a lot, but I am a proper academic, and I'm at John Jay, and I'm at the City University of New York, where there are people who have actually earned their doctorates. I do not have a PhD, and I have a lot of respect for people who do. So I appreciate the battlefield promotion, but just
apologize. So I will
for the record.
I'll call you philosopher, safety philosopher.
Yeah, I'll take that. Maybe I can put those letters after my name. I like that. So there isn't any single way that we think it's best to organize these resources. And what you're going to find in working with us is that we are really ruthless about fidelity to these core ideas. But then there are lots and lots of ways to get it right in any particular place. And what my team will do with you is work with you to figure out how Columbus wants to and can do this best. So we have a whole range of ways that cities do this. So particularly for the support and outreach component, there are places where there's a single agency that has the capacity to do all of this. Most places don't, and so there are different sources with different resources. They get organized. What that ends up meaning is that coordination is central. And while there's no one way of organizing everything, the fact that everything needs to be organized is key. So one of the things that we spoke with the city about going into this is that essential project management function, because somebody needs to own this and herd cats and make sure that everything's getting done. If that is strong and healthy, then the rest, none of this is easy, but the rest will follow. What I also want to say, so you mentioned a relatively big number that the city's already putting into this. What we know, and going back to the previous member's comment about the essential of getting the support and outreach right and keeping people safe, alive, and free. What we know going in, and again, this is not Columbus, this is just the way it works. Most of the resources that have been directed to this problem through what we might call social services will not have been effective because they have not been configured around the immediate needs and circumstances of the smallest number of highest risk people. So we go in presuming that a lot of those resources should be looked at, and if they're not in fact connecting with the highest risk people in an effective way, the city should be open to thinking about redirecting those. And that's, there's no crank to turn to figure out how to do that. But our expectation will be, as we work with you, that there are going to be ways to make much more effective use of some of those monies that you're already spending.
Thank you. Director Speaks.
Thank you, President Pardon. The question was, how do we get buy-in? Well, I can tell you that our interaction and work with David and the Safe Communities Initiative, folks have been very impressed in my shop. Tremendous work ethic, tremendous expertise. Secondly, for lack of a better word, I will say simply self-interest. David is correct in terms of police legitimacy. He talks more from a social scientist aspect, but I can tell you that the father of policing, going back, Sir Edmund Peel talked about the community is police and the police is the community. You have to have legitimacy. And I think that David and his group will help underscore and bolster legitimacy here in Columbus. So to be selfish, self-interest, I think will also help buy-in.
I agree. Thank you, Director. And let me just personally, as an individual council member, applaud the safety department, the mayor's office for going down this road and bringing this contract to council to support. I think this is what I've heard tonight has been really promising and hopeful as we've experienced such a spike. And I appreciate this direction.
That the presentation from Dr. Kennedy, I'll make certain that it is in everybody's hands and all the council members' hands. With that, Councilmember Remy.
Thank you, Chair Brown. We appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight and certainly for hosting this important panel. Mr. Kennedy, I really appreciate the opportunity to hear more from you. I was excited when we saw the contract in the fall and have been able to read up a little bit on your work, but certainly tonight's been very enlightening. You alluded to talked about the importance of having the right team in place to try to mitigate some of these issues, mental health especially, and where my mind's been lately is focusing on the call takers and the dispatching, that because I think that case managers and working within that department will help to push these calls to the right people. It's a place that we need a lot of work in within the city of Columbus. Currently police and fire use two different they have two different codes and they don't mean the same thing. And that, I think a 21st century call taker would, a system where they're using the same code for the same, type of problem makes a lot of sense. And so I'm interested in hear your take on that, because that's an area of interest that I think that we need to work on sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I know something about that issue, of course, and also something about the way people are trying to step up to it better. It's not anything I've got my own particular expertise in, but what I would encourage council and the city is to just think of me and my office as a resource. We've been at this a long time, and we are fantastically well networked, I will say. So I'm just thinking that the person who just designed the new response system for New York. So within the last 6 weeks, New York has shifted its call take and its first responder system for issues especially involving mental and emotional distress. The folks who designed that and are managing that implementation are not just colleagues, they're personal friends of mine. So anything like that, if we don't do it ourselves, I think we're going to be able to make introductions. So just keep that in mind, and you know how to reach me.
Thank you. One more quick thing, and I know we're running low on time, but could you speak a little bit about the importance of community-based policing? That's another area where we've gotten away from in this city, and I know there's a desire to go back to it. At least by policy we have, and they've written policy, let's just say we're not, a lot of our officers do not stay within the same neighborhood night after night after night, shift after shift. And that's about a decades old policy. And so I'm curious where your opinion lies on that.
So I am one of the 3 authors of what turned out to be literally the first book on community policing written in the United States back in 1991. And I've sort of seen that idea become so vague that even I don't know what it means. I saw a period in American policing when everybody said, I'm committed to community policing. And they didn't know what they were committed to, and I couldn't tell what they were committed to. I think there's very interesting work that's going on now in policing to try to make that really concrete. And again, that's not something we would be able to help with directly, but it's certainly something that people I know and work with, and that we know and work with, are being very serious about. There's, again, I'm in New York City right now. For the last 5 years or so, NYPD has very deliberately been putting together a kind of neighborhood-based policing that's not just rhetorical. It's operational. It's got protocol. It has standards and expectations. It has metrics. Officers are being trained in how to do community engagement and how to do problem solving. Community policing has to be real and not just a slogan. And I think it's very interesting that some of the better parts of the field are returning to that. I think having recognized how much of a bumper sticker it turned into rather than actually being genuine and operational. So I guess I'd like to think that we're heading into a new commitment to that. But anything like that has to be what I think you were alluding to. It has to be concrete. It has to be operational. And in lots of places, community policing was not that. It sort of turned into this sort of vague commit to being nicer to people, and that's not enough.
Thank you. I look forward to our continued work together.
Thank you again, Dr. Kennedy and Director Speaks. I'd like to turn it over to Gail Saunders.
Thank you so much, Chairman Brown, and a good evening again, everyone. You may recall we asked you to get your cell phones, your iPads, your computers, because we're going to begin our interactive exercise where we ask you some questions and we'll ask for your opinions. And so, Angela, if we can, thank you, have Cheryl present. Thank you. So, you're going to go to www.mentee.com. Again, that's mentee.com. You're going to put that in your browser. And once you get to that page, you're going to enter the code 3271107. And I'm going to repeat that code one more time, 3271107. And for all of those who are watching through YouTube, we know you're there. So if you can also participate, we would love to get your opinions, as well as all of those who are on Facebook with us. And we put on the Facebook chat the Mentee website, as well as the code number. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with our first question. And this is taking into account what you heard from Mr. Kennedy, what you heard from Director Speaks, as well as the conversation and the questions you've heard from our council members. And so our first question is, how can the City of Columbus address violence in our communities? This is an opportunity for you to give us your ideas, give us your thoughts, considering what you've heard tonight, but also other things that you've heard from various engagements with City Council, with other members of the city, your engagement with police officers, any thoughts that you may have. Just write them one word, a sentence, as many as ideas as you have, and we'll capture them and they'll show up. And so we know that others are out there. We're going to give you some time to go to mentee.com and put in the code 3271107. And if you can share your thoughts, we have about a minute and a half for people to get caught up. And we see you're coming online. Thank you. Provide opportunities for family stability. We see that. Continue to work with the strategy that has been discussed this evening. Invest in youth. We see that. Thank you. Oh, we have more coming. Thank you so much. We see the opportunity to engage with Mr. Kennedy. Expand social services while limiting police response to acute violent crime. Thank you. Hold leaders and police accountable. You can see that response. Thank you. The idea of retraining police, reform, and mental health services. Thank you. Please keep them coming. Provide better access to living wages for all, safe and affordable housing. We know that those determinants of health also play a role. So thank you for that. We see again, invest in mental health. We see that again. Thank you. Decrease poverty. You know, we have our poverty initiative that is part of Franklin County, and that's a big part of the work that we're doing across the county in collaboration with the city and Columbus City Council. The Interrupters Program. Thank you. We have about 30 more seconds. So these are wonderful, bold ideas, and we thank you for providing your thoughts and your opinions. I will say that all of this is being captured. Columbus City Council members have been very deliberate about making sure that we capture all of the feedback that we get so that they can include it as they are beginning to think through the budget. And so all of this is captured and it will be part of the final report. So thank you. And so we have about 1 more minute. Great energy around this food assistance. More community events with officers, engaging them in the community. Part of that officer involved in community engagement discussion that was held earlier. So thank you. Cheryl, if we can go to the next question. And so as we heard tonight's presentation, many various ideas about investing in ways to address violence prevention. We want to hear from you. What ideas do you have? What should we invest in? What should the City of Columbus invest in addition to what we've heard from Mr. Kennedy? Any ideas that you may have? Some of those you may have included in your last comments, but we certainly want to hear from you on that. And so we have about 1.5 minutes to receive your thoughts, your opinions, and we want you to be bold in your thinking. As you know, there are some programs that we already have here in the City of Columbus, that the REACT program and others. So any of your thoughts? Thank you. Go big in investing in affordable housing, mental health, bike police, social workers and non-police intervention teams. Thank you. Money won't solve it. We need family structure, God, Jesus, and accountability. Thank you. Everything Professor Kennedy said is right on point. Review police officers' files to take police off the streets if they have too many offenses internally. Upstream is everything: food, health, housing, education, all of those social determinants of health that we mentioned earlier. We see quite a bit. Contract with, yes. Enact the credible messenger program. More green spaces. That's something we've not seen in these conversations. Mr. Kennedy, I think you're getting a lot of people who are advocating for a contract for you. But we know you're already engaged in this work, so. Community forums between police and the community. Thank you. And I think that's all of our responses for this one. If we can go to our next question. Here's one that we really want you to think about. What are some of those barriers that prevent violence? I'm sorry, what are some of the barriers to preventing addressing violence in the city of Columbus? So what barriers do we see that are part of our community that prevent us from addressing violence, that stop us from working through some of these issues to prevent violence? Great, you see it, wonderful. Oh, we see this, the police union, disruptive police, the FOP. Okay, thank you. Zero tolerance in schools. Public records, breakdown of family structure, systemic racism, institutional and systemic. No trust in the police. These are some of the barriers that we're seeing. Desperation, people's basic needs are not being met. Strict criminal charges, something that was talked about earlier in the presentation. Faulting Black and Brown people. A lack of championship of strategies that we know that work. We see the FOP and the general culture of policing. Funding for schools is so unequal, and how the role that plays in creating barriers. School resource officers, something that school to prison pipelines. That is something that has certainly been talked about over the course of the conversations we've had on this topic. Focus on proliferation of illicit guns and other weapons. And 30 more seconds. Deep-seated hatred among different groups of people. No consequences for bad behavior. So talking about perpetrators and not holding them accountable, or no consequences. Lack of collaboration across agencies. That's something we've not seen in terms of a barrier in our conversations. Lack of collaboration. You can see that as a barrier. And then the misconceptions that people have about violence. I think that's the extent of our new comments. And so now we'll go to our next question. Thank you. Again, this is an opportunity for you to be bold, be deliberate in your thinking, because we want any ideas that you have, we want to capture them. So what is your vision for preventing violence in the city of Columbus? Bold ideas. Things that you may have seen work in other cities, things you've heard about in other cities, things we're doing now, things we're bringing to the city. Need your vision. Okay. We want the NNSC to work with Columbus. David Kennedy nailed it. We have to have a unified effort to shift behavior of the most violent. Bring me back to the table. If you wanted to put in the Facebook, who is the me, we can do that. That will be fine. Walking the Thin Black Line.com. These are all great ideas. Thank you. Capturing them all. Every idea is a great idea. Dr. Deanna Wilkinson. Thank you. Getting you back to the table. Understood. Thank you. Mothers have powers. And as a mom, I kind of like that one. We do. So put them engaged and engage them, as was part of the conversation that we heard earlier. Here's one we haven't seen in these conversations recently. Make sure officers live in the communities they serve. Interesting. We need a system constructed together, talking about the division of police and a new way of constructing that system. We have about 30 more seconds. Stable families. Have a goal of reducing the number of murders we have each year, which we do, we understand. And then housing for all. Thank you. We'll go to our final question. That is our final question for the evening. Thank you so much. If you can go to the next slide, Cheryl. We thank you for being so committed to being engaged this evening in the exercise. Great comments that have all been recorded, so we thank you for that. We do want to remind you that Columbus City Council also has another opportunity for you to give your opinions through the survey that is out in the universe. It's online. You can visit columbus.gov/reimagine safety to take that survey for additional information that Columbus City Council is capturing. And then if we can go to our next slide, we certainly want to thank you for your participation this evening. A reminder that if you have any additional comments that you want to make sure that Columbus City Council receives, you can send those comments directly to reimaginesafety@columbus.gov. So City Council has given you various ways to share your thoughts, your opinions, and we want to make sure that you have access to all of them. So thank you so much for your time. And Chairman Brown, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
This evening, and it will be distributed to all my council colleagues as we continue to look towards addressing these issues. So again, thank you very, very much. At this point, we've reached the public testimony portion of the agenda. I will call your name and council staff will unmute the speakers. Speakers will have 3 minutes to speak. Please state your name and the organization that you represent. Thank you. According to Angie, I have a Mary Counter.
Yes, I'm here.
Ms. Counter, please.
Okay, thank you. My name is Mary Counter from Columbus, Ohio. I represent the organization BREAD, which stands for Building Responsibility, Equality, and Dignity, and I'm a member of the Gun Violence Steering Committee with this organization. We continue to advocate for funding the group violence intervention strategy posited by the National Network for Safe Communities. We stand ready to support the strategy long-term as a group of 41 organized congregations here in Franklin County. This particular strategy requires a strong stream of social services funding that allows us, the community, and law enforcement to make a genuine offer of help to a group member who wants to leave the violent and dangerous life behind. I refreshed my memory on the Franklin County poverty statistics just to reconfirm the serious poverty problem that we have here. The 2018 statistics say our Franklin County poverty rate is 16.7%. For Blacks, it is 29.9%. The other shocking number is 25% for children. I would speculate that the numbers are even higher now. Many of our tiny number of violent individuals are children. Others are parents of children. Repair, reinforce, and stay consistently on a path to enable violent group members to leave the life behind. We are mind, body, and spirit embraced in what Martin Luther King called a single garment of destiny. Let's work together to rise up by funding social services for our brothers and sisters who are looking for a chance to change. Thank you. And do you have any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Counter, for your comments. The next speaker is Brian Weaver.
Hi, my name's Brian Weaver. I'm representing the deaf and disabled community here in the Columbus, Ohio area. I've had numerous conversations with City of Columbus HR manager and City of Columbus Police Foundation board member, Miranda Vollmer. My website's makedeafgreat.com or makecolumbusgreat.com or makecpdgreat.com. I've been with over 30 one-hour meetings with Miranda Vollmer, and in her is concerning as an HR manager. She states that law enforcement cannot change, and she states it's all about the status quo, and also stated that Columbus PD deleted 100,000 cruiser videos. You may ask how I know these details. I know these details because I'm the system administrator for the police department. My name is Brian Weaver. You can go to my website. You'll see officer-involved shooting that the police department are hiding from the public. You'll also see officer assault that they're hiding from the public. These happened right outside of my office, and the lieutenant that was supposed to investigate it got transferred to another police department. And this is what happens in our police department. I worked for the police department for 12 years, and there's major discrimination. Myself being deaf myself, you will hear a recording on my website inside the police administration staff meeting asking me to delete records, asking me to delete FOP union videos, asking me to delete phone call logs to cover up corruption inside the police department. You'll see public records that I publicly posted on my website that the city is not releasing. And I produced these records for the public to see. The public records is public record number 20-1329, which states in the open meeting records, police internal affairs of several officers admitting cover-ups inside of internal affairs and OVIs. And also public record 20-5124 is where City of Columbus Police shot me and pepper sprayed me as I was peacefully protesting, and you'll see the video on the website at makedeafgreat.com or makecolumbusgreat.com. Also, public record 20-3028, you'll see drugs, and you'll see the weight room where the police department stored drugs, and the city maintains they do not have the access logs of officers swiping in and out of the weight room. And I produced the logs on the website publicly for the public to see. You'll see public record 20-1742, where the police department admits that they deleted 100,000 cruiser videos. And I appreciate Kennedy's statement, stay alive and free. Again, you can.
Mr. Weaver?
Yeah.
Please finish your statement, sir.
I thought I got cut off because I heard a loud buzzer.
I'm asking you to finish your comments.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I got cut off. I thought I got cut off. Yes, that's me as a system administrator. You can verify these records by emailing bci@ohioattorneygeneral.gov. I reported all this to the Ohio Attorney General, and the Ohio Attorney General states that the language you hear in the videos, you'll also see the meeting with the Ohio Attorney General office on my website where they did not provide me an ASL interpreter. And the Ohio Attorney General Commissioner Brad Dunn state that the language heard in the staff meeting is acceptable, and it's acceptable to delete these data, the FOP union videos. And I have these things in writing from the Ohio Attorney General and Ohio Ethics. They state that the language is acceptable and no harassment occurred. You'll also see on my website, the state of Ohio unemployment heard the same audio files, and they stated that there was harassment. So I have two different state agencies contradicting each other. The Ohio Attorney General will not investigate because the former city council president worked for the Ohio Attorney General as a supervisor, and he also worked for Board of Elections as a supervisor. And you can look at all the records are public record. I'm the IT system administrator that's been asked to delete numerous records from the city system to cover up corruption inside the police department. along with pay-to-play activities. I've reported this numerous times to Ohio Watchdog, Ohio Attorney General, and you'll see on my website, I met with Governor DeWine several times. You'll notice that his PUCO advisor was arrested last month. Also involved in the public utilities, there's also telephone companies. You'll see that numerous government in Ohio and city agencies have switched telephone companies, so that way you cannot tell who's calling who, and phone logs are no longer public records. You can verify all this. Yeah.
The information you have provided, I know Director Speaks is online. I'm sure you can feel free to give him a call tomorrow or present your testimony in complete and written form. But I know Director Speaks will follow up on the concerns that you've expressed this evening, sir.
Joyce Beatty, Shannon.
Pardon me?
I have contacted Joyce Beatty, Steve Sivers, Shannon Hardin's office several times with no response back.
Well, I'm saying to you now, sir, that Director Speaks will respond back to you. Okay? Thank you, Mr. Weaver. The next speaker is Dr. Deanna Wilkinson. Please state your full name and any organization you represent.
I'm Deanna Wilkinson. I'm a professor at Ohio State and the director of the Urban Gems program. And I've just been very encouraged by the conversation last night and tonight, especially impressed by the systematic and comprehensive way in which City Council is really looking at these hard issues and how we've been working to address gun violence in our city and all of the other social problems that are going on. I'm very encouraged as well for so much emphasis on trying to help those at the highest risk and giving them a chance to get ahead at life, to get re-engaged with our society. And I hope that you will see me as a partner, a knowledge partner, a think partner, and an action partner. I've been deeply committed to the city of Columbus, and I love so many young people out here, and it's heartbreaking to lose so many. And I have been deeply affected by how entrenched this problem has gotten, and we all need to work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wilkinson. It's been a long time since we've talked. As you know, we have history. And it's good history. That brings us to, Angie, I don't think I have any other speakers, or am I incorrect?
No, sir, she was the last speaker.
Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's town hall on reimagining public safety. I want to thank Deputy Director George Speaks and Mr. David Kennedy for their presentation this evening. In addition, I'd like to thank council staff, specifically Angela Burks, and the Saunders Company for helping to facilitate tonight's event. As I've already stated, the Saunders Company will be compiling all the information that they have elicited this evening, and that'll be presented to all the council members as well as to the Department of Public Safety. And finally, I'd like to thank the residents who participated in tonight's town hall. Please join us for the next town hall to discuss reimagining safety in our communities. It's scheduled for Thursday, January 21st, where Councilmember Rob Dorns will be leading a conversation about the Columbus Civilian Review Board. Council will take the feedback we received during these town halls in conjunction with the residents, the surveys, responses, and qualitative data we received from the Saunders Company focus groups to help craft a 2021 operating budget that prioritizes residents' voices to keep our families safe. It's important for all of us as we go into 2021, an editorial comment from myself, that we can control our destiny. We can control the volume of violence that takes place in our community. We simply have to have the will, the desire, and the fortitude to make it happen. We don't want to repeat 2020 with regards to gun violence by any stretch of the imagination. I can say unequivocally that City Council, the Department of Public Safety, that includes our police division and our fire division, are willing to do what is necessary to continue to improve on the way in which we deliver services to our citizens. And we will continue to do that at all costs. Thank you very, very much. Please stay safe, wear a mask, and stay 6 feet apart. And when the director speaks, that means at least 12 feet. Good night.